Okay, we are on a test run right now, looking at switching platforms. So we are just running a quick test on all our platforms. Let's see here, we're just checking the volume, see how this works. Let's see here.
The next step of the investigation is Midian. Mount Sinai was in the vicinity of this ancient land.
Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, where he spends 40 years living as a shepherd with the priest of Midian named Jethro. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, and he led his flock to the wilderness and came to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And this is really compelling. So he goes closer, and God says to him out of the burning bush, "Take your shoes off, you stand on a holy place." And that's when he tells Moses to go back to Egypt, tell Pharaoh to let the people go so that they can come back to this mountain with him, where they will learn how to serve God.
As I reviewed the text for myself, I began to see that the location of Midian would be central to the debate. The obvious implication is that since it was during Moses' stay in Midian that he encountered the burning bush at Sinai, the mountain must have been in or very near Midian. But where exactly was Midian?
There's other indications that are historical of the location of Mount Sinai. One interesting one is found in an allegory by the Apostle Paul in Galatians chapter 4, verses 24 through 26. This allegory contrasts the outworking of the Mosaic law, the law of Moses received on Mount Sinai, versus the divine grace of the new covenant. Essentially, in the Old Testament, it was the law of Moses, the New Testament was the grace. And that's what Paul was writing about in these verses. But this allegory reads, "Which things are an allegory? For these are the two covenants, the old and the new, the one from the Mount Sinai, which gendereth to bondage, which is Agar," and that's referring to Hagar, the concubine of Abraham. "For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all." I'm not
It's almost like a puzzle, isn't it?
Yes, I'm not going to get into the theology of the allegory, but I will say that this allegory is based on real geography. The real geography is the backbone of this allegory. If the geography is not real, the allegory fails. And there's actually word play on two Greek words we're going to look at, answereth and above, which are geographical words. There's actually word play on those. They're used here in the allegory, answereth and above, but they also have geographical meanings.
Now this, I've seen this verse before. Is this King James?
This is a King James, correct?
Because it's a little bit Old English, isn't it?
Yes, and I've used this verse because it would be most familiar to the most people. But it is a little bit odd because Hagar is how we think of.
So the point you're making is that there's two covenants. One is at Mount Sinai, which is related to
the Mosaic law.
Okay, and the other one is Jerusalem. So it's basically giving you two geographical locations and a spiritual connection.
Yes, it's saying that the law is related to Mount Sinai in Arabia where it was given, and those who have left the law and gone to the New Testament grace are above in Jerusalem.
And they're free. Okay.
Yes, because they're living in grace and not the law.
What do you think this is actually communicating?
Well, the first thing we have to do is identify what was Paul's Arabia. In his day, the Arabia he referred to was called Arabia Felix. That means the happy Arabia. And his idea of Arabia would be based on Old Testament passages, because Paul was essentially trained as a Jewish scholar. And the first passage we look at is in 1 Kings 10 regarding the Queen of Sheba. Solomon received revenues from merchants and traders and from all the Arabian kings and the governors of territories. So the South Arabian kingdom of Sheba was within Arabia Felix. And if we look at a map in antiquity, the ancient geographer Ptolemy, writing in 150 AD, described Arabia Felix as beginning at the head of the Gulf of Aqaba at Aqaba and extending down into the Arabian Peninsula. It lay below this line and east of the Gulf. So this was Arabia Felix. This is the area that I believe the Apostle Paul was referring to when he said that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. Now here's another example. In Isaiah, Dedan is cited. Dedan was clearly located in Arabia Felix. This was a prophecy against Arabia, your caravans of Dedanites who camp in the thickets of Arabia, etc. So based on Old Testament passages, the Apostle Paul would have thought of Arabia Felix as the part of Arabia in which Sinai was located. Looking at this map, it's a replication of Ptolemy's work circa 150 AD. Here's Jerusalem, and here is Arabia Felix. And this would represent the head of the Gulf of Aqaba here, the head of the Red Sea. And then you see Arabia Felix lying east of that and below that. Mm-hmm. And the east-west dimensions here are wrong because of longitude problems in the time of Ptolemy, but it does show us that Arabia Felix was below Jerusalem and east of the head of the Gulf of Aqaba.
Well, and why is this then significant? Is that Paul would have had this understanding and he's trying to tell you something about where Mount Sinai is?
I believe he assumed the reader would know where Arabia was. Mm-hmm. He said Mount Sinai in Arabia, mm-hmm. and he doesn't go obviously into detail about that, but cranking back the clock, we would say that the most logical position would be Arabia Felix.
And what's happening, though, is that throughout then history, church history or Christian history, they've put the mountain over here in the Sinai.
Exactly.
And the Sinai meaning the east, what they thought was east. But what you're suggesting is that no, east is even further east than what you think. The mountain is further east than the Sinai Peninsula. It's over here.
Yes, and to talk a little more about the geography of Moses, he referred to Yam Suf, or the Gulf of Aqaba, which is the eastern arm of the Red Sea. He referred to that as a landmark east of Egypt. Now, once he was east of that landmark, what was he going to use for a direction? Well, he just said that this is a wilderness of east, or this is the mountain east of the easts.
Mm-hmm. Or if it was east or far east, right?
Yes, so he's basically saying, I'm not sure exactly where we are, but it's east of Yam Suf, which was his main landmark, mm-hmm. and even farther east was the mountain. Very simplistic, but yet without having landmarks and place names to go by, you really don't have a choice.
Well, if you think about even different civilizations, this was the world that they knew, right? And they didn't go too much further because they didn't know what was going to happen. Or, I mean, I don't know how completely true my statement is in the fact that they did know what was there, but if they thought this was far east, they hadn't traveled too far then to know that there's something even farther, right?
Yes, and things were very nebulous. The measurements were poor. Mm-hmm. They were reports of travelers and military ventures. So it was a hodgepodge idea of what was going on geographically. Now, to Josephus, who wrote about the time of the Apostle Paul, he defined Arabia Felix as being east of the Red Sea, and being the place where Midian was located. And so we have another hint there. If there's other hints that Mount Sinai was somehow related to Midian, and Josephus is placing Midian east of the Red Sea in Arabia Felix, we have a triangulation there on potential locations to look for.
Okay.
Now, we're going back to the allegory of the Apostle Paul in Galatians chapter 4, and what I've done is pulled out just the geographical statements. Mount Sinai in Arabia, we've shown where that is, answereth to Jerusalem, which is above. That's the geographical statement in the allegory. And the two Greek words that we need to look at are systoikio and ano. Aristotle used systoikos geographically for places standing on the same row or coordinate. Now, in our modern language, we would say that would be a line of longitude or latitude. This word denotes lying on a grid in relationship to another place on the grid, on the same row or coordinate. So we have to say Mount Sinai would be on the same line of latitude or longitude as Jerusalem. But it doesn't tell us, was that north or south, east or west? We don't know. It's just on the same line as Jerusalem.
So by using the Greek word systoikio, is it?
Yes.
Systoikio, that Paul uses and Aristotle uses it geographically.
Yes.
We know the first part of this is that it's either a line, whatever that line
East,
is.
west, or north, south,
Yeah,
but on
okay.
the same line, wherever
Okay.
it is.
All right.
Also, this was the only use of systoikio in the entire New Testament. Just a one use in this verse, which to me suggests that the Apostle Paul handpicked that word for this particular geographical wordplay in his allegory.
He's giving you a clue.
It sounds like a good clue to me. Looking at the word ano, it occurs 7 times in the New Testament. It means upward or on the top. In our lingo, it would be north. Jerusalem was above Mount Sinai. So on a map, on the globe, that would be north. So now we know that they were on the same meridian of longitude, because this is north-south, and that Jerusalem was north of Mount Sinai.
Yeah, you can read it there. Mount Sinai in Arabia answereth to, or is in
On the same line.
the same line to Jerusalem, which is above.
Exactly. Now, looking at the old city of Jerusalem, the meridian of longitude that passes through is at 35 degrees 14 minutes. This was the old Temple Mount area here of Jerusalem. If we extend that line straight south from Jerusalem, we see that it extends into the northwest Saudi Arabian area in the region of Midian, and it comes very close to the mountain range of Jebel Lawz.
But if the mountain is over here,
It wouldn't work as well, would it?
I mean, yes. So you're suggesting that this longitude line comes all the way through, and it does. It's very, very close to this Jebel Makla, Jebel Lawz.
Yes, Jerusalem answers to Mount Sinai in Arabia, and Jerusalem is above. It's just a very simple, and it's so ironic that there seems to be a line there. If we look actually at the area of Jebel Lawz range, and here's the same meridian that passes through Jerusalem, 35 degrees 14 minutes, it's only 4 miles west of Jebel Lawz.
Okay, let me ask you a couple of questions about this. The Apostle Paul, he obviously knew the scriptures very well, but didn't he go to Mount Sinai, or did he ever travel to this location?
He went to Arabia. That's all that we know. He exiled to Arabia for a time to study or meditate. We're not told where, but
Would that Arabia have been this particular Arabia, Arabia Felix?
my guess is that he went into Arabia Felix, but we don't know.
We don't know,
And it doesn't pay to speculate any further, but we do know that 150 or 100 years after Paul wrote that Ptolemy had already established a fairly accurate latitude and longitude system. And actually, I looked at Ptolemy's original longitudes from 100 years after Paul, and his longitude 66, he used a different system, comes right through the same area. And so we know that there was good knowledge as close to 100 years of Paul about the longitude relationships in this area of the world.
Okay, I want to just bring something up that's just really curious, is that a lot of ancient people were really, really smart. I mean, I know people today that would have no clue of how you would establish a longitude line. But here we are thousands of years earlier, and Ptolemy and others were doing it, right?
Exactly. 1900 years ago, he had a system of longitudes that were marked in various locations in his book called The Geography.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the Apostle Paul possibly could have even understood things like geography and study of the stars, or knowing how to map things out? Because I know if we look at when Christ was born, there were wise men in the East, right, that they were looking at the stars, and they were looking at astronomical movements of planets and stars, and they were gauging things through that. The ancient mind might have looked at the sky an awful lot. And I know that when you're on a ship, or if you're out trying to find where you are, you use a North Star, you use other things to navigate at night.
All right. Well, just wanted to play that, see how the platforms were working. We are shifting to a new platform that's going to open up different social media platforms that we can actually reach with what we're bringing forth with content, such as short documentaries like that, things of that nature. So we're going to try to see how this platform works for us. We have not made a decision yet to go with this platform for long term. We're just trying to see how this is going to work for us. So I just wanted to give it a test run. I hope you enjoyed that. That is a good documentary if you want to nerd out a little bit on the Exodus. The Exodus is a challenged view in the Bible. Sometimes it's good to know these things because you know what you believe. It's historically founded. It's not something that's a fable or made up. We do not follow cunningly devised fables. We want to make sure that what we believe is true. And it's historically verified, archaeologically verified in the Word of God that the Exodus was an actual event. And these documentaries, there's a couple parts that we're going to post on YouTube, and Lord willing, we'll post them on this platform that we will post so people can see. And I know it's not everybody's forte, but hey, knowledge is power. And what you know is only going to help you, but you got to apply yourself to knowledge. You got to focus your mind, concentrate, come outside your comfort zone, come outside the baby food and the spiritual milk, and go into spiritual meat. And that takes application of your mind. It takes special attention. So I just want to give you that little rundown. As a ministry, we're looking to transfer over some platforms, some live streaming capabilities, using another platform here. So I just wanted to share that short documentary. And God bless you guys. Hopefully this works out for us, and we can see each other as we stream forward in this rest of this year. God bless you.